Ada Vin's hands shook as she held the rusted key, staring at the cabin that was supposed to save her life. The door hung crooked on broken hinges. Wind screamed through gaps in the walls wide enough to see through. Behind her, Mrs. Kettering's laughter cut through the cold like a knife. 12 acres of wind and a shack fit for rats. That's your inheritance, girl. Your aunt was a fool, and now you'll freeze just like she did. Ada turned, meeting the woman's eyes with something harder than the Wyoming frost settling on her shoulders. She was 16, orphaned, and had 93 cents to her name. But she wasn't going back to that town. She'd die out here first. Before we continue with Ada's story, if you're enjoying this tale of survival and determination, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. Now, let's see how Ada faces the impossible winter ahead. The door opened with a sound like bones breaking. Ada stepped inside and immediately wished she hadn't. The cold inside the cabin felt worse than outside. Trapped, stagnant, malicious. Her breath formed clouds that hung in the air like accusations. "You sure about this, girl?" The voice belonged to Samuel Pruitt, the probate custodian who'd driven her out here in his wagon. He stood in the doorway, not quite willing to enter. "Town's got a boarding house. Mrs. Carmichael might take you on as kitchen help. Won't pay much, but you'd have a roof and meals." Ada set her carpet bag on the floor. It held everything she owned. 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, a photograph of her parents, and a tin of buttons her grandmother had collected. "Mrs. Carmichael told me yesterday she had no positions available." "Well, she might have changed her—" "She told me that while I was standing at her back door." Ada kept her voice level. "She didn't even let me finish asking." Pruitt shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Medora's not a rich town, Ada. Folks can't afford charity." "I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Pruitt. I'm asking for work." She turned to face him fully. "But since no one will give me that, I'll take what my aunt left me." "Your Aunt Marta was crazy." The words came out harsher than he'd probably intended. Everyone knew it. Lived out here alone for 30 years, talking to herself, stacking wood inside her house like it was furniture. The only reason folks didn't commit her was because she never hurt nobody. Ada's throat tightened. She'd never met Aunt Marta. Her parents had forbidden it, called her mother's sister touched in the head, and warned Ada never to mention her name. But when the fever took both her parents within 3 days of each other, when the landlord threw her belongings into the street, when every door in Medora closed in her face, the letter from the probate office was the only thing that arrived. 12 acres and a structure, the letter had said. Aunt Marta had left it all to Ada, her only living relative, a girl she'd never even met. "Mr. Pruitt," Ada said quietly, "thank you for the ride out here. You can go back now." He hesitated, genuine concern crossing his weathered face. "Ada, I know you've had a hard time of it. Losing your folks, and your father's debts eating up everything." 93 cents, Ada interrupted. "That's what was left after they sold everything. 93 cents and this property. So unless you're offering me something else, Mr. Pruitt, I'd appreciate if you'd leave me to figure out my situation." Pruitt's jaw tightened. "You won't last 2 weeks out here. The first real cold snap will kill you." "Then at least I'll die on my own land." The words hung in the frozen air between them. Finally, Pruitt turned and walked back to his wagon. Ada watched through the broken doorway as he climbed up, took the reins, and drove away without looking back. When the sound of the wagon faded completely, Ada let herself sit down on the floor. Her legs gave out, and she realized they'd been shaking the entire time. The brave words, the steady voice, it had all been performance. Now, alone in the dying light of a November afternoon, The reality crashed over her like ice water. She was going to die out here. The thought came with such clarity that it didn't even frighten her at first. It was simply a fact, like knowing winter followed autumn. She had no food, no firewood, no money to buy either. The cabin had holes in the walls, a roof that sagged in the middle, and a stone fireplace that looked like it might collapse if she actually lit a fire in it. Ada pressed her hands against her face and felt hot tears leak between her fingers. She was so tired. Tired of being brave, tired of pretending she knew what she was doing, tired of being 16 and alone in a world that had no place for her. "Stop it," she whispered to herself. "Stop crying and think." But thinking hurt worse than crying, because when she thought about it clearly, when she added up all the ways this situation was impossible, there was no solution that ended with her alive. The last light leaked out of the sky. Ada knew she should do something, gather kindling, try to start a fire, figure out how to block the worst of the drafts. Instead, she sat on the cold floor of her inheritance and let the darkness come. She must have dozed off, because when she jerked awake, the moon had risen. Silver light streamed through the gaps in the walls, creating strange patterns on the floor. Ada's whole body ached from cold. Her teeth chattered so hard her jaw hurt. Move. She had to move or she'd freeze right here on the first night. Ada forced herself to stand. Her legs screamed in protest, muscles cramped from the cold. She wrapped her arms around herself and looked around the cabin properly for the first time. It was smaller than she'd expected, maybe 12 feet by 16 feet. The fireplace took up most of one wall, built from river stones mortared together. A wooden bed frame stood in one corner, the rope webbing that should have held a mattress long since rotted away. The floor was dirt, packed hard by years of use. And everywhere, stacked against every wall, piled in corners, arranged in careful rows, was firewood. Ada moved closer to the nearest stack. The wood was old but dry, split into neat pieces. It rose from floor to ceiling, creating an inner wall of timber. She walked along it, trailing her fingers over the rough bark. "Stacking wood inside her house like it was furniture," Pruitt had said. The moonlight revealed more. Between the stacks of wood, Ada could see the cabin's original walls, and they were worse than she'd thought. The logs had separated, creating gaps an inch or more wide. Wind whistled through them constantly. No wonder the cabin felt colder inside than out. The walls offered no protection at all. But the wood did. Ada pressed her hand against the stacked firewood, then moved to feel the wall behind it. The temperature difference was noticeable. The wood created a barrier, a buffer between the inside of the cabin and the screaming wind outside. "You weren't crazy," Ada whispered to the aunt she'd never known. "You were surviving." The realization sent energy through her frozen limbs. If the wood worked as insulation, then maybe, just maybe, she could make this work. But first, she needed fire. Ada went to her carpet bag and pulled out the tin of buttons. She poured them onto the floor and found what she was looking for at the bottom. Matches. 6 of them, wrapped in wax paper. 6 matches to start a fire in a fireplace she wasn't sure was safe to use. She gathered the smallest pieces of kindling from around the cabin, finding bits of bark and wood shavings caught in corners. Her hands were so cold she could barely feel them, but she forced herself to move carefully, deliberately. This had to work on the first try. The fireplace had old ash in it, but no obvious blockage in the chimney. Ada arranged her kindling in a small pyramid, struck the first match, and held her breath. The match flared, died. Wind from the chimney had snuffed it immediately. Ada's heart sank. She struck the second match, cupping her hand around it, moving faster. The kindling caught for a moment, then went out. 3 matches left. She crawled into the fireplace, looking up the chimney. Moonlight showed through. No blockage, but the draft was wrong, pulling air down instead of up. Cold air sank, her father had taught her once. Warm air rises. Ada scrambled out and began moving wood from one of the stacks. She built a small wall in front of the fireplace, creating a windbreak. Then she tried again with the third match. This time, the kindling caught and held. The small flame grew. Reaching for the larger pieces, Ada carefully fed it. Smoke curled upward, and after a tense moment, she heard it. The sound of the draft reversing, of the chimney beginning to draw properly. Ada sat back, watching the fire grow, feeling tears stream down her face again. But these weren't tears of despair. These were tears of a small, impossible victory. She fed the fire until it burned steady and strong. Heat began to fill the cabin. Not much, not yet, but enough to stop her shivering. Ada pulled the wooden bed frame closer to the fire and curled up on it, wrapping herself in both her dresses for extra warmth. As exhaustion pulled her towards sleep, her mind turned over a new problem. The fire would last the night, maybe, but tomorrow she'd need food. She'd need water. She'd need a plan for surviving more than just one day at a time. Figure it out tomorrow, she told herself. Tonight, you're alive. That's enough. But as sleep took her, Ada's last thought was of her Aunt Marta, alone in this cabin, stacking wood against the walls year after year. Had she known someone would come after her? Had she built this strange fortress hoping someone would understand? Or had she simply survived the only way she knew how, and hoped it would be enough? The fire crackled. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled its ancient song. And inside, a 16-year-old girl slept in her inheritance, not knowing yet that she held the answer to a winter that would nearly kill them all. Morning came too soon. Ada woke to find the fire reduced to embers and frost coating the inside walls of the cabin. Everywhere except where the wood was stacked. Those walls stayed dry. She fed the fire back to life with the last of the easy kindling, then forced herself to face the day. Her stomach cramped with hunger. She'd eaten nothing yesterday except a piece of bread at dawn before Pruitt's wagon came. Water first, then food, then figure out how to not die. Ada found a bucket by the door and stepped outside. The morning air hit her like a fist. She gasped, her lungs seizing at the cold. The sky was clear, which meant tonight would be even colder. She knew that much from her father's complaints about weather. A creek ran about 50 yards from the cabin. She'd seen it from the wagon yesterday. Ada walked toward it now, her shoes crunching through frost-stiffened grass. The water ran clear and fast, not yet frozen. She filled the bucket and hurried back, her fingers already burning with cold. Inside, she set the bucket by the fire to let it warm. Then she took stock of her situation with brutal honesty. Assets. A cabin with a working fireplace. Walls stacked with firewood. Maybe enough for a month if she was careful. 3 matches left. 93 cents. The clothes on her back. A carpet bag with nothing useful except a Bible and buttons. Needs. Food. A way to earn money. A way to repair the cabin before the real winter came. Knowledge. Nothing. She knew nothing about surviving alone, about hunting or trapping, about which plants were safe to eat. Her parents had kept her away from rough work, hoping to marry her to a merchant's son who never materialized. The math didn't add up. There was no path from here to survival. Ada sat by the fire and let herself think the thought she'd been avoiding. Maybe I should walk back to town and beg. But even as she thought it, she knew it wouldn't work. She'd already begged. Every door in Medora had closed. The good Christian people of that town had made their position clear. She was the orphan daughter of a man who died in debt, the niece of crazy Marta, and they wanted nothing to do with her. "Then I'll have to find another way," Ada said out loud, her voice sounding strange in the empty cabin. She stood and walked to the nearest wall of stacked wood, really looked at it. The pieces were all different sizes, but fitted together almost like a puzzle. No gaps, no wasted space. The stack went from floor to ceiling, about 2 feet thick. Ada pulled one piece out carefully. Behind it, the cabin wall showed through, cracked, separated, completely inadequate. But the wood stack held steady. She replaced the piece and moved to check the other walls. 3 of the 4 walls had this same construction. Only the fireplace wall remained exposed. And now, standing in the slightly warmer cabin, with the fire burning steady, Ada understood what her aunt had built. Not just insulation, a survival system. The wood kept the heat in, but it also meant fuel was always at hand. She could pull pieces from the inner layer, and the outer layer would still protect her. It was a renewable wall, a living barrier between her and death by cold. "Thank you, Aunt Marta," Ada whispered. "I understand now." But understanding wouldn't fill her stomach or earn her money. She needed to go back to town, needed to try one more time to find work, or at least trade her labor for food. Ada banked the fire, wrapped herself in her mother's shawl, and started the long walk back to Medora. The town looked exactly as it had yesterday. Wooden buildings clustered along a single main street, smoke rising from chimneys, a few people moving between shops, despite the cold. Ada walked straight to the general store, her last hope. Marcus Werner, the store owner, looked up as she entered. His expression went immediately flat. "Mr. Werner," Ada said quickly, before he could speak, "I'm not here to buy anything. I'm here to ask if you need help." "I can sweep, stock shelves, carry boxes, anything you need. I'll work for food instead of money if that's easier." Werner shook his head. "Already got help. My son handles the heavy work." "I could, Ada," his voice wasn't unkind, but it was final. "I can't take on workers I don't need. That's just how it is." Ada's hands tightened into fists in her pockets. "Is it because of my father's debts? Because I didn't borrow that money. I don't owe." "It's not about debts." Werner glanced around the empty store, lowering his voice. "Look, I'll be straight with you. This town's barely holding on as it is. We got a hard winter coming. Everyone can feel it. People are scared. They're hoarding supplies, hoarding money, looking after their own. It's not personal, but nobody's got room for charity right now." "I'm not asking for charity," Ada said, her voice cracking despite her effort to stay steady. "I'm asking for a chance to earn my way." Werner's face softened slightly. "I know, girl, and I'm sorry, but that's the truth of it." Ada turned and left before the tears could come. She tried 4 more places: the hotel, the saloon, the boarding house, and the seamstress shop. Every door closed. Every voice said no. By the time she started the walk back to the cabin, the sun was setting, and Ada understood something new about her situation. The town wasn't going to help her because they couldn't. They were all afraid, all barely holding on themselves. In their eyes, she was already dead, just a ghost who hadn't stopped moving yet. Fine, then she'd be a ghost who survived. The walk back seemed longer, colder. When the cabin finally came into view, Ada felt something she hadn't expected: relief. The sight of that broken-down shack, with its stacks of wood and smoking chimney, felt more like home than anywhere else she had left. Inside, the fire had died to almost nothing. Ada rebuilt it carefully, using her second-to-last match when the embers wouldn't catch. She'd have to be more careful about keeping it going overnight. Her stomach cramped again, hollow and aching. She'd had nothing but creek water all day. Tomorrow she'd have to figure out food, somehow. Maybe there were wild plants. Maybe she could fashion a snare for rabbits. She didn't know how, but she'd have to learn. For tonight, though, she had fire and walls and a roof, however broken. She had survived day one. Ada curled up on the bed frame again, pulling her dresses tight around her. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the Wyoming darkness. But inside, surrounded by her aunt's careful stacks of wood, Ada felt the faintest whisper of possibility. She wasn't dead yet. And as long as she wasn't dead, there was a chance she could figure out how to stay that way. 3 days without food changed everything about how Ada saw the world. The creek water filled her stomach temporarily, but by the fourth morning, her hands shook so badly she could barely grip the firewood. Her thoughts moved slowly, like cold honey. She'd spent yesterday searching the frozen ground around the cabin for anything edible, roots, berries, anything, and found nothing but frost-killed grass and bare earth. The fire had to be fed. Ada pulled herself upright, swaying slightly, and reached for a piece of wood from the stack. Her fingers brushed something that wasn't wood. A leather pouch wedged between 2 logs. Ada's heart jumped. She pulled it free with trembling hands and opened it. Inside, dried venison, hard as leather but unmistakably meat. Maybe 20 strips. And beneath that, a folded piece of paper. Ada's vision blurred with tears as she bit into the venison. It was so tough she could barely chew it, but the taste of salt and smoke flooded her mouth like salvation. She forced herself to eat slowly, to not make herself sick. Only after 3 strips did she unfold the paper. The handwriting was shaky, but legible. To whoever finds this, you'll need more than wood to survive. Check the north wall, bottom corner, 3 logs up. The rest is up to you. M. Ada scrambled to the north wall, counting up 3 logs from the bottom corner. She pulled 1 piece of wood free. Behind it, carved into the cabin's original log wall, were words. Snares in the ceiling beams. Seeds in the floor by the door. Water in winter. Melt snow, not creek ice. Ada looked up. The ceiling beams were dark with age and smoke. But now that she was looking, she could see something wound around one of them. She dragged the bed frame over, climbed up shakily, and found coils of thin wire wrapped around the beam. Snare wire. Her hands shook as she unwound it. She had no idea how to make a snare, but she had the materials now. That was something. The floor by the door was packed earth, but Ada got down on her hands and knees and started digging with a piece of flat stone. 6 inches down, her fingers hit something hard. A tin box, rusted but sealed. Inside, seeds in small cloth bags, each labeled in the same shaky handwriting. Turnips, beans, squash, potatoes. "You knew," Ada whispered, sitting back on her heels. "You knew someone would come. You left everything I'd need." But knowing where the tools were and knowing how to use them were different things. Ada had never set a snare in her life. Her father had hunted sometimes, but he'd never taught her. Women didn't hunt. Women stayed home and made meals from what men brought back. "Well, there's no man here now," Ada said out loud. Her voice sounded stronger after eating. "So I'd better figure it out." She spent the rest of that day teaching herself to make snares from the wire. Her first attempts were clumsy, the loops too loose or too tight. By the 10th try, she'd managed something that looked like it might actually hold a rabbit if one was stupid enough to run into it. The next morning, Ada set her snares in a line along what looked like a game trail near the creek. Rabbit tracks in the frost, small and delicate. She had no bait, so she'd have to hope the rabbits would run into the loops naturally. Walking back to the cabin, Ada noticed something she'd been too desperate to see before. The land wasn't just empty wind. There were juniper bushes on the south slope, their berries still clinging to branches. The creek had cattails growing along the edges, their roots edible if you knew how to prepare them. The landscape held food if you knew where to look. "But I don't know," Ada said to herself. "I don't know anything." The admission hurt worse than the hunger had. Every skill she needed to survive out here was a skill her parents had never taught her. They'd raised her to be a merchant's wife, to manage a household staff, to arrange flowers and pour tea. None of that mattered now. She spent the afternoon gathering juniper berries, chewing them carefully. They were bitter and strong, but they were calories. She dug up cattail roots with a sharp stick, her fingers cramping with cold, and brought them back to boil over the fire. By evening, her stomach hurt from the unfamiliar food, but she'd eaten. That was victory enough. The snare stayed empty for 3 more days. Ada checked them every morning, her hope sinking each time she found the wire loops undisturbed. She ate juniper berries and cattail roots, gathered dead wood to keep the fire going, and slowly began to understand her aunt's system more completely. The wood stacked against the walls wasn't random. The outer layers were older, more weathered. The inner layers were newer, drier. Aunt Marta had rotated her supply, always keeping the driest wood closest to hand, while the outer layers continued to season. It was brilliant in its simplicity. Ada started rebuilding sections of the wall that had collapsed over the years since her aunt's death. She learned which pieces fitted together best, how to create a tight stack that wouldn't topple. The work kept her warm and gave her hands something to do besides shake with hunger. On the 8th day, Ada found a rabbit in her snare. She stood over it, her heart hammering, looking at the small dead creature caught by its neck. She'd killed something. The thought made her stomach turn, but the smell of roasting meat an hour later drove away any guilt. That rabbit lasted 3 days. Ada forced herself to eat slowly, to make it stretch. She dried some of the meat over the fire, the way the venison in the pouch had been dried. When it was gone, she reset the snare and waited again. The pattern became her life. Check snares, gather food, feed fire, stack wood, sleep, wake, repeat. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The cold deepened with each day. Ice formed on the creek, thickening from the edges inward. Ada remembered the message carved in the wall. Water in winter, melt snow, not creek ice. Why not creek ice? She didn't know, but she trusted her aunt's wisdom now. When snow came, she'd melt that instead. The first real snowfall arrived on a morning when Ada's breath froze into ice crystals before it could dissipate. She woke to find white light filtering through the gaps in the walls, and when she opened the door, snow had drifted halfway up the frame. Ada stood in the doorway, watching snow fall from a gray sky, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not fear, not despair. Something closer to wonder. She was still alive. Against every probability, every expectation, every voice that had told her she'd die out here, she was still alive. "I'm doing it," she whispered. "I'm actually doing it." But the celebration was premature. That afternoon, while checking her snares in the blowing snow, Ada heard voices, human voices, carried on the wind. She froze, listening. 2 men, maybe 3. their words indistinct, but their tone clear. They were arguing. Ada's first instinct was to hide, but curiosity pulled her forward. She crept through the falling snow, following the voices to a small clearing near the creek. 3 men stood around a dead deer. 2 of them were strangers, rough-looking men with heavy coats and rifles. The third was Samuel Pruitt. "I'm telling you, this is my land," one of the strangers said. His voice was hard. "Been hunting it for 5 years. That deer's mine by right." "Land belongs to someone else now," Pruitt said. "Young girl inherited it from Ada Vin. 12 acres, legal and proper." "A girl?" the second stranger laughed. "What's a girl going to do with 12 acres in the middle of winter? She's probably already dead." "Maybe so," Pruitt said quietly. "But that don't make the land yours, Hackett." Hackett, the first stranger, spat into the snow. "You think I care about some dead girl's claim? I'm taking this deer. You got a problem with that, old man?" Ada stepped out of the trees before she could think better of it. "The girl's not dead." All 3 men spun toward her. Pruitt's eyes went wide. Hackett's hand moved toward his rifle. "And that's my deer on my land," Ada continued, her voice steadier than her legs. "So I'd appreciate if you'd leave it." Hackett looked at her for a long moment, then burst out laughing. "Hugh? You're going to stop me?" "No," Ada said. "The law is. Mr. Pruitt just said it. This is my land. That makes you a trespasser and a thief." Hackett's laughter died. "Big words from a little girl." "Legal words," Pruitt said, moving to stand beside Ada. "She's right, Hackett. You take that deer, I'll report it to Sheriff Morgan. Your choice." The tension stretched like wire. Hackett's hand stayed near his rifle. His companion shifted, ready for whatever came next. Then Hackett smiled, a cold, ugly thing. "Fine. Keep your deer, girl. But winter's long and land's just dirt. You won't last anyway." He turned and walked away, his companion following. Ada watched until they disappeared into the snow, then her legs gave out. She sat down hard in the frozen ground. "You're alive," Pruitt said, sounding genuinely shocked. We all thought, that I'd be dead by now," Ada finished. "I know. Everyone thought that." Pruitt looked at her more carefully. She knew what he was seeing. A girl thinner than she'd been 3 weeks ago, wearing clothes that had seen better days, her hands chapped and raw from work. But she was standing. She was breathing. She was alive. "How?" he asked simply. Ada gestured toward the cabin, barely visible through the snow. "My aunt knew what she was doing. She left me everything I needed. I just had to figure out how to use it." Pruitt shook his head slowly. "Marta was always smarter than folks gave her credit for." He looked at the deer. "You know how to dress a deer?" "No." "Well, you can't leave it here. Wolves will get it by nightfall." He pulled out a knife. "I'll show you. Pay attention. You might need to do this yourself someday." Ada knelt in the snow and watched as Pruitt field-dressed the deer, explaining each step. Her stomach turned at the blood, at the intimate violence of taking an animal apart. But she forced herself to watch, to remember. "Why are you helping me?" she asked as he worked. Pruitt didn't look up. "Because I was wrong. I told you you'd die out here. I was so sure of it that I didn't even try to help. Just wrote you off as dead and went home." He paused, his hands stilling. "But you proved me wrong. That takes guts. Takes more than guts. Takes something I don't see much anymore. So yeah, I'll help you dress your deer. Seems the least I can do." They worked in silence after that. When the deer was ready to transport, Pruitt helped Ada drag it back to the cabin. He stopped at the door, staring at the stacked wood visible through the gaps. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "She really did stack it inside." "It works," Ada said. "Keeps the heat in better than any wall could." Pruitt looked at her with something new in his eyes. "You keep surprising me, Ada Vin." "I keep surprising myself, Mr. Pruitt." He left soon after, promising to check on her in a few weeks if the snow allowed. Ada dragged the deer inside and spent the rest of the day cutting the meat into strips to dry. Her hands cramped from the work, and the smell of blood made her dizzy. But by evening, she had enough meat hanging near the fire to last a month if she was careful. That night, for the first time since arriving at the cabin, Ada fell asleep without the hollow ache of hunger eating at her insides. But sleep brought dreams. In them, Hackett returned with his rifle. In them, the cabin burned while she slept. In them, the cold finally found its way through the wood and froze her where she lay. Ada woke gasping, sweat cooling on her skin despite the cold. The fire had burned low. She fed it automatically, her hands moving through the familiar motions while her mind raced. Hackett would be back. Men like that didn't forget insults, didn't let go of grudges. And she was alone out here, miles from help, with nothing but walls of wood and her aunt's ingenuity to protect her. "Not enough," Ada whispered to the darkness. "It's not enough." But what else could she do? She had no weapons, no way to defend herself if someone came with violence in mind. The wood kept her warm, but wouldn't stop a bullet or a torch. Ada sat by the fire and thought about her aunt, living alone out here for 30 years. How had she managed it? How had she stayed safe? The answer came slowly, built from weeks of discovering her aunt's hidden preparations. Marta hadn't just survived, she'd planned. She'd left knowledge, tools, food, water instructions, everything Ada needed to follow in her footsteps. So what would her aunt do about Hackett? Ada stood and began searching the cabin with new purpose. If Marta had left snares and seeds and dried meat, if she'd carved instructions into the walls, then maybe she'd left something else. Something for protection. It took an hour of searching, but Ada finally found it. Another carved message behind the wood stack near the bed. This one was different, harder to read, like it had been carved in haste or fear. Men who take by force understand only force, but women survive by being necessary. Make yourself necessary, and they'll protect you instead of hurt you. Ada read the words 3 times, trying to understand. Make herself necessary? Necessary to who? And then it hit her. Not to Hackett, to the town. Winter was coming, the real winter, the kind Pruitt had warned about. And when it hit, people would need things. They'd need knowledge, resources, help. They'd need what Ada was learning out here, alone in her cabin with its walls of wood and its secrets carved into logs. The seed of an idea took root in Ada's mind. It was dangerous. It required trust she wasn't sure she had anymore. But it was better than waiting for Hackett to return with bad intentions. She'd go back to Medora, not to beg, not to plead for work or charity. She'd go to offer them something they'd need to survive the winter that was coming. Ada looked at the walls of stacked wood surrounding her, at the dried meat hanging by the fire, at the wire snares coiled and ready for use. Her aunt had survived 30 years alone by being smarter than the cold, tougher than the land. Now it was Ada's turn to be necessary. Ada walked into Medora on a morning so cold the snow squeaked under her boots. She carried nothing but a cloth sack and the knowledge that what she was about to do would either save her or destroy whatever small chance she had left. The general store was busier than she'd expected. 6 people clustered near the stove, their voices low and worried. They fell silent when Ada entered. Marcus Werner looked up from behind his counter. "Ada, didn't expect to see you again." "I need to speak with everyone," Ada said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "It's about the winter." "Winter's already here, girl," one of the men said. Ada recognized him, Thomas Brennan, who owned the livery. "In case you hadn't noticed." "The real winter hasn't come yet," Ada replied. "And when it does, people are going to freeze." Werner's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Ada set her sack on the counter. "I'm talking about houses that can't hold heat, about wood supplies that'll run out by January, about people burning through their fuel twice as fast as they should because their walls leak cold like sieves." "Our houses are fine," a woman said sharply. Mrs. Carmichael, from the boarding house. The same woman who'd turned Ada away weeks ago. "Are they?" Ada looked at her directly. "How many times do you feed your stove each night, Mrs. Carmichael? How much wood are you burning to keep your guests from freezing?" Mrs. Carmichael's jaw tightened. "That's my business." "It's everyone's business when the wood runs out," Ada said. She pulled a piece of dried venison from her sack and set it on the counter. "This is from a deer I caught on my land 3 days ago. It'll stay good for months because I know how to preserve it. I have enough meat right now to last until spring." "Good for you," Brennan said. "What's that got to do with us?" "My cabin was colder than any building in this town," Ada said. "The walls had gaps wide enough to see through, but I haven't been cold in 2 weeks, and I'm burning less wood than any of you. Want to know why?" The silence stretched. Finally, Werner spoke. "How?" "My aunt showed me. Not directly, she died before I got here, but she left instructions carved into the walls, hidden supplies, methods for surviving that none of you know about." Ada looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. She lived alone in that cabin for 30 years, 30 winters, and she never froze, never ran out of food, never had to come crawling to town for help. "Marta was crazy," Mrs. Carmichael said, but her voice lacked conviction. "No," Ada said quietly. "She was smart, and she knew something you're all going to learn the hard way if you don't listen." Werner leaned forward. "What do you want, Ada?" "I want to help you winterize your houses before the real cold hits. I want to show you how to stack wood for insulation, how to set snares, how to preserve meat so it lasts. I want to teach you what my aunt taught me." "In exchange for what?" Brennan's voice was suspicious. Ada took a breath. "Food. Not charity. Trade. I teach you, you share your supplies with me. Flour, salt, beans, things I can't get on my own. We help each other survive." "You're asking us to pay you for advice," Mrs. Carmichael said. That's business," Werner interrupted. He studied Ada with new interest. "You really think you can help us?" "I know I can." Werner looked at the others. "Anyone here want to freeze this winter?" No one answered. "Anyone got wood to spare?" Still silence. "Then maybe we should listen to what the girl has to say." "She's 16, Mrs. Carmichael protested. "What could she possibly know that we don't?" "She's alive," Werner said flatly. "We all thought she'd be dead by now. She's not. That means she knows something." Ada felt a small flame of hope kindle in her chest. "I can start with whoever wants help first. Just need to see your house. See how you're set up now, and I'll show you what changes to make." "I'll go first," Werner said. "My back room's freezing no matter how much I heat the stove. Wife's been complaining for weeks." "I can fix that," Ada said with more confidence than she felt. 2 hours later, Ada stood in Werner's back room, looking at walls that were indeed leaking cold at an alarming rate. The room had been added on to the main building, and whoever built it had done shoddy work. Gaps showed between boards. The single window had no insulation around its frame. Cold air poured in from a dozen places. "You're losing all your heat through these gaps," Ada explained to Werner and his wife Clara. "Every time you feed the stove, the heat runs straight outside. You're basically heating Wyoming." "So what do we do?" Clara asked. Her skepticism had softened considerably since entering the freezing room. "Stack wood against the walls. Not outside, inside. Create a barrier between the cold wall and the room. The wood insulates better than anything else you could use, and as you burn through it, you just rotate new wood in from outside." Werner frowned. "Won't that take up half the room?" "Would you rather have space or warmth?" Ada asked. "Because right now, you have neither." Clara nodded slowly. "She's right, Marcus. Show us what to do." Ada spent the rest of the day working with the Werners, showing them how to stack wood efficiently, how to seal the worst gaps with mud and cloth, how to arrange the furniture to create warm pockets of air. By evening, the back room already felt noticeably warmer. "I'll be damned," Werner said, standing in the middle of the room. "It actually works." "It'll work better once the wood's been stacked for a few days," Ada said. "The air trapped between the logs creates another layer of insulation. By next week, you'll barely need to feed the stove." Clara brought out bread and cheese without being asked. "Eat, you've earned it." Ada ate slowly, forcing herself not to gobble like an animal despite her hunger. The bread was fresh, still warm from baking. The cheese was sharp and rich. It tasted like victory. "You'll help others?" Werner asked. "If they ask?" "That's why I came." "And you'll want payment." "Trade," Ada corrected. "I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Werner. Just fair exchange. My knowledge for your supplies." Werner nodded slowly. "I'll spread word. See who's interested." He paused. "Hackett was in here yesterday, asking about you." Ada's stomach tightened. What did he want to know? "If you were still alive? If you'd been back to town? I told him I hadn't seen you." Werner's eyes were steady. "But he'll hear about this, about you helping people. He won't like it." "Why not?" "Because men like Hackett think the world owes them something. They see a girl making her way, and it offends them, makes them feel small." Werner leaned forward. "You need to be careful, Ada. Hackett's got friends. Mean ones." "I'll be careful," Ada said, though fear curled in her belly like smoke. She left the Werners' place as full dark was falling. The walk back to the cabin felt longer, colder. Every shadow could hide Hackett. Every sound made her jump. But she made it home safely, fed the fire, and allowed herself to feel the triumph of the day. She'd done it. She'd made herself necessary. Over the next week, 5 more families asked for Ada's help. She showed the Pruitts how to set snares along their property line. She taught Mrs. Sullivan from the boarding house how to dry meat over low fires so it wouldn't spoil. She helped the Brennans stack wood in their drafty barn, creating warm corners for the horses. Each time she traded her knowledge for supplies: flour, salt, a blanket, a warm coat that had belonged to someone's dead son. Slowly, her stores built up. Slowly, she stopped being quite so hungry all the time. But the weather turned worse. Temperatures dropped to levels that made breathing painful. Ice formed thick on the creek. Snow fell in waves that buried fences and drifted against houses. And Ada noticed something that made her blood run cold. The families she'd helped were managing. Their houses stayed warmer. Their wood lasted longer. But the families she hadn't reached yet, the ones who'd either not asked for help or couldn't afford to trade for it. They were suffering. She heard the stories in Werner's store. Old man Peterson had frozen to death in his sleep, his house too cold, his woodpile depleted. The Marsh family's youngest child had pneumonia, her tiny body racked with fever in a house that couldn't hold heat. 3 more families had packed up and left town entirely, heading south to family, abandoning their claims. "This is the coldest December anyone can remember," Pruitt told Ada when he stopped by her cabin to check on her. "And January's going to be worse." "People are dying," Ada said flatly. "People die every winter." But Pruitt's face was grim. "Just usually not this many." "I can help them. I can show everyone what to do." "Not everyone can afford to pay you, Ada." He said it gently, but the truth stung. "You need those supplies to survive yourself." Ada stood at her window, a real window now, sealed with oiled cloth she'd traded for, and looked out at the white expanse of winter. "My aunt survived 30 years alone. She never went to town, never traded with anyone. How did she do it?" "Maybe she just accepted that some winters, people die." "No." Ada turned to face him. "She left me messages, instructions. She wanted me to survive." "But why? Why go to all that trouble if she thought survival was just about hoarding supplies and letting others freeze?" Pruitt had no answer. That night, Ada couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the Marsh child, about Peterson frozen in his bed, about all the families struggling while she sat warm and fed in her cabin. "Make yourself necessary," her aunt had written. But necessary to who? To the people who could afford to trade? Or to everyone? Ada got up and lit a candle. She went to the north wall, to the carved messages her aunt had left. She read them all again, searching for something she'd missed. And then she found it, a message she'd seen before but not really understood, carved small near the floor. "A town that freezes is a town that dies. Save the town, save yourself." Ada sat back on her heels, her mind racing. Her aunt had lived alone, but she'd cared about Medora. She'd understood something Ada was only now beginning to grasp. In a place this harsh, this cold, survival wasn't individual. It was collective. If Medora died, if everyone left or froze, then Ada would be truly alone. And being alone in winter, even with all her aunt's knowledge, meant death eventually. She had to save the town, to save herself. The next morning, Ada walked back to Medora through knee-deep snow. She found Werner opening his store and followed him inside. "I need to talk to everyone," she said without preamble. "Everyone in town. Can you arrange a meeting?" Werner looked at her carefully. "What's this about?" "About surviving. About all of us surviving, not just the ones who can pay." "Ada, you can't give away what you know for free. You'll starve." "I'll starve faster if this town dies around me," Ada said. "Trust me, Mr. Werner. I know what I'm doing." He didn't look convinced, but he agreed to spread word. By that evening, 30 people had crowded into the general store, packed around the stove, looking at Ada with expressions ranging from hopeful to hostile. Hackett was there. Ada felt his eyes on her like cold fingers on her neck. "Thank you for coming," Ada began. Her voice shook slightly. "I know some of you think I'm crazy, that I'm just a girl who got lucky. But I'm here to tell you that luck has nothing to do with it." "Then what does?" someone called out. "Knowledge. My aunt spent 30 years learning how to survive winters like this one. She left me everything she learned, and I've been using it. That's why I'm alive. That's why my cabin's warm, while yours are freezing." "So you came here to brag?" Hackett's voice cut through the room like a blade. Ada looked at him directly. "I came here to help." "For a price?" "No. Not this time. Ada raised her voice. I'm offering to show anyone who wants to learn how to winterize their homes, how to stack wood for insulation, how to preserve food, how to stay alive. No payment, no trade, just knowledge shared freely. The room erupted in murmurs. Werner stepped forward. Ada, you can't. Yes, I can, Ada interrupted. Because here's what I figured out. If you all freeze, if Medora becomes a ghost town, then I freeze too. Maybe not this winter, but eventually. I can't survive completely alone, and neither can any of you. So we help each other, or we all die. Those are the only options. You expect us to believe you're doing this out of kindness? Hackett's voice dripped skepticism. I'm doing this out of survival, Ada shot back. Smart survival. The kind my aunt understood. A town that freezes is a town that dies, and I need this town alive. Silence fell. People looked at each other, uncertain. Then Mrs. Carmichael spoke up. I was wrong about you, Ada Vin. I thought you were just another burden we couldn't afford. But you're offering to help us for nothing? For community, Ada corrected. For the understanding that we're all trying to survive the same winter. Mrs. Carmichael nodded slowly. Then I accept your help, and I apologize for turning you away. Others began voicing agreement. Pruitt, the Brennans, families Ada didn't even know. One by one, they accepted her offer. But not Hackett. He stood and pushed through the crowd toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back. You're making a mistake, girl. Giving away what makes you valuable. Come spring, no one will remember what you did. They'll just remember you're the orphan, living in crazy Marta's shack. Then I guess I'll have to prove my value in other ways, Ada said quietly. Hackett left, slamming the door behind him. But Ada barely noticed. She was too busy looking at the faces around her. Faces that had changed from skeptical to hopeful, from hostile to grateful. She'd done it. She'd made herself necessary not through hoarding, not through charging what people couldn't afford, but through making the whole town stronger. We'll start tomorrow, Ada said. Anyone who wants help, meet me here at first light. Bring whatever wood you can spare. We're going to save Medora together. That night, walking back to her cabin under stars sharp enough to cut, Ada thought about her aunt's final message. Save the town, save yourself. Marta had understood something that took Ada weeks to learn. In winter this harsh, there were no individuals. There was only the community that survived together or the bodies that froze alone. Ada intended to survive, and now so would Medora. But as she approached her cabin, she saw something that stopped her cold. Fresh tracks in the snow leading to her door. Boot prints. Large ones. Someone had been here while she was gone. Ada's hand tightened on the walking stick she'd started carrying. She approached slowly, her heart hammering. The door stood slightly ajar. She pushed it open carefully. The fire had died to embers, but in the dim light she could see the destruction. Her dried meat, torn down and scattered. Her seed tin, opened and emptied onto the floor. Her carefully stacked wood toppled into chaos. And carved into the table in fresh, angry letters. Should have stayed in town, girl. Hackett's warning. Hackett's threat. Ada stood in the ruins of her carefully built security and felt rage burn through the fear. He thought this would break her. Thought destroying her supplies would send her crawling back to town, defeated and desperate. He didn't understand that she'd already faced worse than this, that she'd started with nothing and built something from emptiness, that every time someone pushed her down, she learned to get back up stronger. Ada began picking up her scattered seeds with steady hands. Tomorrow, she'd help the town. Tonight, she'd rebuild. Because that's what survival meant. Not just enduring. Not just holding on. Getting back up. Every single time. Ada worked through the night, sorting seeds by candlelight, salvaging what meat hadn't been trampled, restacking wood with hands that refused to stop shaking. By dawn, when she should have been exhausted, rage had burned through her fatigue like kindling. She walked into Medora carrying her walking stick and wearing the destruction on her face like a badge. Werner saw her first. "Ada, what happened to you?" "Hackett paid me a visit." Her voice came out flat, hard. "Destroyed my supplies, left a message carved in my table." The crowd that had gathered for her promised help went silent. Pruitt stepped forward. "Did he hurt you?" "I wasn't there. He made sure of that." Ada looked around at the faces watching her. "He wants me scared, wants me to give up and leave. Should I?" "No," Mrs. Carmichael said immediately. "You stay, you help us, and we'll make sure Hackett understands he can't threaten people in this town." "How?" Ada asked. "He's got friends, he's got guns. What do I have?" "Us," Werner said. "You've got us now." The words hit Ada harder than she'd expected. Her throat tightened. For weeks she'd been alone, fighting to survive by herself. The idea that someone might actually stand with her felt dangerous to believe. "Then let's get to work," she said, "because talking won't keep anyone warm." Ada spent that day moving between houses like a winter storm, showing families how to transform their freezing homes into something survivable. At the Pruitt house, she worked with Samuel and his wife Eleanor, helping them stack wood in their parlor. "Won't this look strange?" Eleanor asked, eyeing the growing wall of timber. "Would you rather look proper or stay alive?" Ada shot back. Then, softer, "I know it's different. My aunt's methods always were. But different doesn't mean wrong." Eleanor touched the wood stack, then the cold wall behind it. Her eyes widened at the temperature difference. "My word, it's already warmer." "It'll get better," Ada said. "Give it 3 days and you won't believe how much difference it makes." By afternoon, Ada had worked with 6 families. Her hands were raw, her back ached, but she kept moving. At the boarding house, Mrs. Carmichael met her at the door. "I have 8 guests," she said without preamble, "all complaining about the cold. Can you help?" Ada surveyed the building. The boarding house was larger than anything she'd worked on, with multiple rooms and a second floor. "It'll take time, and a lot of wood." "I'll pay you." "I said no payment." "Ada," Mrs. Carmichael's voice was firm, "you're giving your knowledge free, and that's admirable. But your supplies were destroyed. You need food. So I'm paying you in meals, 3 a day, hot, for as long as you're working here. That's not charity. That's fair trade for labor." Ada wanted to refuse on principle, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. Mrs. Carmichael smiled. "That's settled then. Come eat first. You look half-starved." The meal was simple, stew and bread, but Ada ate like it was a feast. Mrs. Carmichael sat across from her, watching. "I judged you harshly," the older woman said. "When you came asking for work, I saw a burden, a problem. I didn't see a person fighting to survive." "You saw what everyone else saw," Ada said quietly. "A girl who'd already lost." "But you didn't lose. You won. Against odds that should have killed you." Mrs. Carmichael leaned forward. "That takes a kind of strength most people never find. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." Ada felt tears prick her eyes, but forced them back. "I'm not strong. I'm just stubborn." "Same thing sometimes." They worked together for the next 3 days. Ada showed Mrs. Carmichael and her hired man how to stack wood efficiently, how to seal drafts, how to create warm pockets in the building's coldest rooms. By the end, the boarding house had transformed from an icebox into something almost comfortable. Your guests will stop complaining now, Ada said, surveying their work. If they don't, I'll remind them what it was like before you came. Mrs. Carmichael pressed a cloth-wrapped package into Ada's hands. Extra food, for your trouble. Mrs. Carmichael, don't argue with me, girl. You've earned it 10 times over. Walking back to her cabin that evening, Ada felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Real hope, not just desperate determination. The town was changing. People were warmer, safer, and she'd done that. But the hope died when she reached her cabin and found Sheriff Morgan waiting outside. "Miss Vin," he said, touching his hat. "Need to talk to you about a complaint." Ada's stomach dropped. "What kind of complaint?" "Hackett claims you threatened him. Says you came after him with a weapon, made accusations about him stealing from you." Morgan's face was neutral, professionally blank. "That true?" "No." Ada's voice shook with anger. "He destroyed my supplies. I told people about it. I never threatened him." "You got proof he did it?" "The message he carved in my table. The tracks in the snow leading to my door." "Messages can be carved by anyone. Tracks can be made by anyone." Morgan shifted his weight. "Look, Ada, I'm not saying you're lying, but I also can't arrest a man on suspicion. You understand? I understand that he can destroy my property and threaten me, and nothing happens to him. But if I speak truth about it, suddenly I'm the problem." Ada's hands clenched into fists. "Is that about right, Sheriff?" Morgan's jaw tightened. "That's not what I said." "It's what you meant." Ada stepped closer. "Let me ask you something, Sheriff. How many people have you talked to in town? How many told you their houses are warmer because of me? How many families did I save?" "That's not relevant to—" "It's completely relevant, because Hackett's scared. I'm making myself necessary to this town, and he hates it. So he's trying to drive me out before I become too important to touch." Morgan was quiet for a long moment. "You might be right about his motives, but that doesn't change the law. Without proof, I can't do anything." "Then what good is the law?" Ada heard the bitterness in her own voice. "What good are you?" "Ada." "Get off my property, Sheriff. Unless you're planning to arrest me for speaking truth, you're not welcome here." Morgan left, and Ada went inside her cabin, slamming the door so hard the wood stacks shook. She fed the fire with violent movements, throwing logs into the flames like weapons. The injustice of it burned hotter than the fire. She'd done everything right, followed the rules, helped people, made herself valuable. And still, men like Hackett could destroy with impunity, while she had to prove her right to exist. Ada paced the cabin, her mind racing. What would her aunt have done? Marta had survived 30 years alone, dealing with men like Hackett, facing winters like this. How? The answer came from the carved messages on the walls. Make yourself necessary. But Ada had already done that, and it wasn't enough. Unless... Ada stopped pacing. An idea formed, dangerous and desperate. She'd made herself necessary to the town, but maybe she needed to make herself necessary to Hackett too. Or at least, make opposing her cost more than it was worth. The next morning, Ada walked straight to Hackett's claim, a rough cabin 3 miles north of town. She pounded on his door with her walking stick until he answered. Hackett opened the door, surprise flickering across his face before it hardened into contempt. "You got guts, I'll give you that. Coming here alone." "We need to talk," Ada said. "Got nothing to say to you." "Then listen." Ada planted her stick in the snow. "You destroyed my supplies. You threatened me. You tried to scare me into leaving. It didn't work." "Should have worked. Girl like you got no business." "I'm not leaving," Ada interrupted. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop threatening me. You're going to leave my property alone. And in exchange, I won't tell everyone in town what I found on my land." Hackett's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "The deer you shot. The one you claimed was on your land." Ada's voice stayed level despite her racing heart. "It was on my property, which means you were trespassing, which means every deer you've been hunting for 5 years, you've been poaching on land you don't own." "That's a lie." "Is it? Because I can show Sheriff Morgan exactly where my property lines run. Can show him where I found your spent shells. Can tell him how you've been hunting my land without permission for years." Ada leaned forward. "And then what happens to you, Hackett? Town finds out you're a thief and a liar? You think your friends will protect you then?" Hackett's face went red. "You threatening me?" "I'm offering you a choice. Leave me alone, and I keep quiet about your hunting. Keep coming after me, and I make sure everyone knows what you've been doing. Nobody will believe you. They believed me about winterizing their houses. They believed me when I taught them to survive. They'll believe me about this, too." Ada met his eyes. "Because I've proven myself." "What have you proven, Hackett? That you're good at bullying girls and stealing deer?" For a moment, Ada thought he might hit her. His hands clenched, his body tensed. But something in her face, maybe the complete absence of fear, maybe the cold certainty in her eyes, made him hesitate. "You're making a mistake," he said finally. "Winter's long. A lot of things can happen." "Yes, a lot of things can." Ada turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Hackett, if anything happens to me, anything at all, I've left instructions with Mr. Werner. A letter detailing everything I know about your hunting. If I die, if I get hurt, if I disappear, that letter goes straight to the sheriff. You understand?" She didn't wait for his answer, just walked away, her legs shaking but her back straight, praying he wouldn't shoot her before she got out of range. The bluff had worked. She had no letter, no evidence beyond circumstantial tracks and her own word. But Hackett didn't know that, and now he had to weigh whether destroying her was worth the risk of exposure. When Ada reached town, she went straight to Werner's store. "I need to write a letter, and I need you to keep it somewhere safe." Werner looked up from his ledger. "What kind of letter?" Ada told him everything. The confrontation with Hackett, the bluff she'd made, the insurance she needed to make it real. Werner listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said when she finished. "I'm playing the only game I know how to win," Ada replied. "Will you help me?" Werner pulled out paper and pen. "Write your letter. I'll keep it in my safe." "And Ada?" He waited until she looked at him. "You're braver than anyone I've ever met. Or crazier. Haven't decided which yet." "Can't it be both?" Werner laughed despite himself. "Write your letter." Ada wrote carefully, detailing every interaction with Hackett, every threat, every piece of evidence she had or could find. When she finished, Werner sealed it and locked it away. "Now what?" he asked. "Now I keep helping people, keep making myself necessary, keep surviving." Ada managed a tired smile. "Same as always." Over the next 2 weeks, something remarkable happened. Medora transformed. House by house, family by family, the town learned to hold heat. Woodpiles lasted longer. Rooms stayed warmer. Children stopped coughing from constant cold. Old people stopped dying in their sleep. And Ada was at the center of it all, moving between homes, teaching, adjusting, problem-solving. She showed the blacksmith how to stack wood in his forge to maintain heat overnight. She taught the doctor's wife how to create warm rooms for sick patients. She helped the school teacher insulate the one-room schoolhouse so children could learn without freezing. The transformation wasn't just physical. People who'd barely spoken to Ada now greeted her by name. Families invited her for meals. Children waved when she passed. She'd gone from town pariah to town savior in the span of a month. But the weather kept getting worse. Temperatures dropped to levels that made breathing painful. Snow fell in walls that buried houses to their windows. The cold was relentless, crushing, murderous. And then, on a morning so cold the air hurt to breathe, Ada heard the sound she'd been dreading. The bell. The town emergency bell, ringing in slow, desperate peals. Ada ran toward the sound, her heart hammering. A crowd had gathered in the town square. Through them, she saw it. The boarding house, smoke pouring from its second floor. "Fire!" someone screamed. "Mrs. Carmichael's still inside!" Ada didn't think. She just moved, pushing through the crowd, running toward the burning building. Someone grabbed her arm. Pruitt, his face terrified. "Ada, no! The whole second floor is going up!" "Mrs. Carmichael, help me," Ada said, yanking free. "I'm not letting her burn." She ran into the building before anyone could stop her. Smoke choked the air, thick and black. Ada dropped to her knees, crawling toward the stairs. Heat pressed against her like a physical weight. "Mrs. Carmichael!" she screamed. "Where are you?" A cough answered her. Ada crawled faster, following the sound. She found Mrs. Carmichael collapsed at the base of the stairs, her face gray with smoke. "Can't breathe," the older woman gasped. "I've got you." Ada hooked her arms under Mrs. Carmichael's shoulders and dragged her toward the door. The woman was heavy, dead weight, and Ada's muscles screamed in protest. Behind them, something crashed, a ceiling beam giving way. Ada dragged harder, faster, her lungs burning, her eyes streaming. The door seemed impossibly far away. She wasn't going to make it. They were both going to die in this smoke-filled hell. Then hands grabbed her, grabbed Mrs. Carmichael, pulled them both toward air and light. Ada found herself outside, coughing violently, Pruitt's arms around her while the doctor bent over Mrs. Carmichael. "She's breathing," the doctor said after an endless moment. "She'll be all right." Ada collapsed backward into the snow, her whole body shaking. Around her, men fought the fire with buckets of water, but the second floor was gone, consumed by flames that reached toward the frozen sky like demons. When she could breathe again, Ada looked for Mrs. Carmichael. The older woman was sitting up now, wrapped in blankets, her eyes finding Ada's. "You came back for me," she said hoarsely. "You fed me when I was starving," Ada replied. "Seemed only fair." Mrs. Carmichael started crying, ugly, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Ada crawled over and held her, two women who'd survived what should have killed them, clinging to each other in the snow, while Medora burned. The fire finally died as sunset painted the sky red. The boarding house stood like a skeleton, its second floor destroyed, its first floor smoke-damaged, but intact. Mrs. Carmichael stood looking at the ruins of her livelihood, her face empty of expression. "I'm finished," she said quietly. "I can't rebuild. I don't have the money. I don't have the strength." "You have us," Werner said. He'd appeared beside them with Pruitt and a dozen other townspeople. "We'll rebuild it. Together." "Marcus, you can't afford—" "None of us can afford to lose you," Werner interrupted. "You run the only boarding house for 50 miles. Travelers need a place to stay. The town needs you." He looked around at the gathered crowd. "We all survive together, or we all fail. Isn't that right?" A chorus of agreement rose from the crowd. People volunteered labor, materials, help. And Ada, watching them, realized what she'd done. She hadn't just taught them to survive the cold. She'd taught them to survive together. That night, Exhausted and smoke-stained, Ada walked back to her cabin under stars that glittered like ice. Her body ached, her lungs hurt, her hands were blistered from dragging Mrs. Carmichael through the fire. But she was alive. They were all alive. And for the first time since her parents died, Ada felt like she belonged somewhere. The cabin welcomed her with familiar warmth. She fed the fire, ate the last of the bread Mrs. Carmichael had given her, and curled up on her bed frame. Tomorrow they'd rebuild. Tomorrow they'd keep fighting the cold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new reasons to give up. But tonight, Ada had proven something more important than survival. She'd proven that community was stronger than cold, that together they could face anything winter threw at them. And that was worth every scar, every ache, every moment of terror. Outside, the wind howled its ancient song. But inside, surrounded by walls of wood and the memory of hands that had pulled her from fire, Ada slept without fear. January came like a predator, silent and lethal. The temperature dropped so fast that water froze in buckets within minutes. Breath crystallized before it could dissipate. The sky turned a pale, merciless gray that promised no relief. And on the morning of January 15th, when Ada walked into town to check on families, she found panic. "It's coming," Pruitt said, meeting her at the edge of the main street. His face was gray with fear. "The storm everyone's been talking about. The old-timers say it'll be the worst in 50 years. "When?" Ada asked. "Tonight. Maybe sooner." Pruitt grabbed her arm. "Ada, this isn't like the cold we've had. This is the kind of storm that kills towns, buries houses, freezes people where they stand." Ada looked at the sky. The gray had deepened, taken on a greenish tinge that made her stomach clench. "Then we'd better make sure everyone's ready." She spent the next hours moving through Medora like a general preparing for battle. At each house, she checked the wood stacks, the sealed gaps, the insulation. Most families had followed her instructions. Their houses would hold. But some hadn't. The Peterson widow, Old Man Peterson's wife, who'd barely spoken since her husband froze to death, lived in a shack on the eastern edge of town. When Ada arrived, she found the woman sitting by a dying fire, her supplies nearly gone. "Mrs. Peterson," Ada said gently, "the storm's coming. You need to come into town. Stay with someone who has better shelter." "No." The woman's voice was flat. "I'm staying here, with Henry's things." "You'll die here." "Then I die." Mrs. Peterson looked at Ada with empty eyes. "What's the point of surviving when everyone you love is gone?" Ada knelt beside her. "The point is that you're still breathing, that you still matter, that this town needs every person who knows how to survive." She took the woman's cold hands. "Please, let me help you." Mrs. Peterson's face crumpled. "I don't know how to keep going." "Neither did I," Ada said quietly. "But I learned, and so can you." It took another 10 minutes of gentle persuasion, but finally Mrs. Peterson agreed to stay with the Werners. Ada helped her gather essentials and walked her to the general store, where Clara Werner took the older woman in with warm efficiency. "Thank you," Mrs. Peterson whispered before going inside. "Thank me by surviving," Ada replied. She checked 4 more houses, found 2 more families who needed help, and was heading back to her cabin when she saw smoke rising from the north. Not chimney smoke, something darker, angrier. Ada ran toward it, dread building in her chest. As she crested the hill, she saw Hackett's cabin engulfed in flames. A crowd had already gathered, not to help, but to watch. Ada pushed through them and found Hackett on his knees in the snow, his face blackened with smoke, coughing violently. "Anyone inside?" Ada demanded. Hackett shook his head, still coughing. "Got out. Just barely." What happened? Stovepipe cracked. Sparks caught the wood I had stacked by the wall. Hackett's voice was bitter. Whole place went up in minutes. Ada looked at the burning cabin, then at Hackett. He destroyed her supplies, threatened her, tried to drive her away. Every reason to leave him to freeze in the storm that was coming. But she thought of her aunt's message. Save the town. Save yourself. Come on, Ada said, offering her hand. You're coming with me. Hackett stared at her. What? The storm's coming. You'll freeze without shelter. My cabin's got room. Ada kept her hand extended. But if you come, you follow my rules. No threats. No violence. We survive together or not at all. Why? Hackett's voice cracked. Why would you help me after what I did? Because I'm not you, Ada said simply. Because I understand something you never did. Survival isn't about taking from others. It's about making sure everyone has enough. Hackett looked at her hand for a long moment. Then, slowly, he took it. They walked back to Ada's cabin in silence. Hackett carrying nothing but the clothes on his back and the shame on his face. When they arrived, Ada showed him where to sit, gave him water, and began preparations for the storm. The wood, Hackett said, looking at the stacked walls. It really works. It kept me alive all winter, Ada replied. It'll keep us both alive tonight. As darkness fell, the wind began to scream. Ada had never heard anything like it. A sound like the earth itself was tearing apart. Snow didn't fall, so much as fly horizontally, driven by wind that hit the cabin like fists. But inside, surrounded by walls of stacked wood, the temperature held steady. The fire burned bright, and Ada and Hackett waited out the storm in careful silence. Hours passed. The wind grew worse, then impossibly worse. Ada could hear things breaking outside. Tree branches, fence posts, maybe entire buildings. The cabin shook with each gust, but the wood stacks held firm, creating a fortress within a fortress. I'm sorry, Hackett said suddenly. His voice was rough. For what I did, for how I treated you. Ada didn't look at him. Why did you do it? Because I was scared. Hackett stared at his hands. You were just a girl. And you were doing what I couldn't, making people respect you, making yourself matter. And his voice broke. I've never mattered to anyone, so I tried to break you down to my level. That's not how it works, Ada said quietly. Breaking others doesn't lift you up. It just makes everyone lower. I know that now. Hackett looked at the wood stacks, the carefully organized supplies, the evidence of survival earned through knowledge rather than force. Your aunt was right. And you're stronger than I'll ever be. Ada fed the fire, watching flames dance across the logs. Strength isn't about who can hit harder or threaten louder. It's about who gets back up, who keeps trying, who survives and helps others survive too. The storm raged all night. Ada dozed fitfully, waking every time the wind changed pitch or the cabin groaned. But each time she woke, the wood stacks held firm, the fire burned steady, and the temperature stayed survivable. Dawn came gray and brutal. When Ada opened the door, she found snow drifted 8 feet high against the cabin. The world had transformed into an alien landscape of white and ice. We need to check on the town, Ada said. In this? Hackett gestured at the frozen wasteland. We'll freeze before we get halfway there. People might be dying right now. We're going. They bundled themselves in every layer they could find and started the trek toward Medora. The walk that normally took 30 minutes took 3 hours. They had to climb over drifts, break trail through snow that came up to their waists, fight wind that tried to knock them down with every step. When they finally reached town, Ada's heart sank. Half the buildings had collapsed under the weight of snow. Smoke rose from only a few chimneys. The streets were empty, buried under white. "We're too late," Hackett said. But Ada was already running toward the general store. She pounded on the door until it opened. Werner stood there, looking exhausted, but alive. "Ada, thank God! We thought—" He stopped, seeing Hackett behind her. "What's he doing here?" "Helping," Ada said.
"Who needs assistance? Who's in trouble?" Werner's expression shifted to grim determination.
"The boarding house roof collapsed. Mrs. Carmichael and her guests are trapped. The Marsh family's chimney got blocked. They'll suffocate if we don't clear it. And we can't find the Peterson widow." "Mrs. Peterson is with Clara, isn't she?" "Was. She left during the storm. Said she needed to get something from her house. Never came back." Ada's blood ran cold. "Show me where she lives." They organized quickly. Pruitt and Werner would go to the boarding house. Hackett would help the Brennans clear the Marsh chimney. Ada would search for Mrs. Peterson. "You can't go alone," Werner protested. "I'm the only one light enough to move fast through the drifts," Ada replied. "And I know how to read snow. I'll find her." She set out before anyone could argue further, moving through the frozen town with desperate speed. Mrs. Peterson's shack was on the eastern edge, nearly a mile away. Ada ran when she could, climbed when she had to, and prayed she wasn't too late. The shack had collapsed completely, buried under snow. Ada circled it, looking for any sign of life, and found tracks, barely visible, already filling with new snow. They led away from the shack, heading east into the open land. "No," Ada whispered. "What were you thinking?" She followed the tracks, her legs burning, her lungs screaming in the cold air. The tracks wandered, looped back on themselves, showed signs of confusion. Mrs. Peterson had gotten disoriented in the storm. Ada found her half a mile from town, collapsed in a drift, her body already dusted with snow. "Mrs. Peterson!" Ada dropped to her knees, checking for breath. Faint. So faint. But there. Ada hauled the older woman onto her back and started walking. The weight made every step agony. Her muscles shook, her vision blurred with exhaustion. But she kept moving, one foot in front of the other, refusing to let death claim another person. By the time she staggered into Werner's store, Ada couldn't feel her legs. She collapsed through the door, Mrs. Peterson still on her back. Hands grabbed them both. The doctor appeared, checking Mrs. Peterson's vital signs. "She's alive, barely, but alive." Ada lay on the floor, gasping, while Clara Werner covered her with blankets. "You saved her. You actually saved her." "Had to," Ada managed between breaths. "Promised her survival was worth it. Had to prove it." Over the next hours, the town rallied. Pruitt and Werner dug Mrs. Carmichael and her guests out of the collapsed boarding house. Hackett cleared the Marsh chimney, saving the family from carbon monoxide poisoning. Others worked to restore chimneys, clear roofs, check on neighbors. And slowly, miraculously, Medora came back to life. By evening, every family had been accounted for. Not a single person had died in the storm, not one. The townspeople gathered in Werner's store, packed together for warmth, sharing food and stories. The mood was exhausted, but triumphant. They'd survived the worst winter storm in 50 years. "We owe Ada our lives," Mrs. Carmichael said. She stood, despite the doctor's orders to rest, her voice carrying through the crowded room. "Without her teaching us how to winterize our homes, half of us would be dead." "More than half," Pruitt added. "The cold we faced, it was the kind that kills. But because Ada showed us what to do, we survived." Ada stood in the corner, uncomfortable with the attention. "I just shared what my aunt taught me. She's the one who figured it out." "But you're the one who made sure we all knew," Werner said. "You gave your knowledge freely, even when you had nothing." even when we'd turned our backs on you." He looked around the room. "This town owes Ada Vin a debt we can never fully repay." "I don't want repayment," Ada said quietly. "I just wanted us all to live." Hackett stepped forward. The room went silent. "I owe Ada more than anyone," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I tried to destroy her, threatened her, drove her to the edge. And when my own stupidity burned my house down, when I had nothing, she saved me anyway." He looked at Ada directly. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for the chance to earn it." Ada studied him for a long moment. Then, "Help rebuild Mrs. Peterson's house. Help repair the boarding house. Work with the families who need assistance. Do that, and we'll call it even." Hackett nodded, something like hope flickering in his eyes. "I will. I swear it." The gathering continued late into the night. People shared food, told stories, laughed with the relief of those who'd stared at death and survived. And at the center of it all, Ada sat surrounded by the community she'd built, the town she'd saved. When she finally walked back to her cabin in the pre-dawn cold, Pruitt walked with her. "You've changed this place," he said. "Changed all of us." "I just did what needed doing." "No," Pruitt said firmly. "You did what seemed impossible. You took knowledge that could have made you rich, that you could have hoarded and sold for everything you needed, and you gave it away free. You built a community instead of building walls." Ada thought about her aunt's messages carved into the cabin walls. "My aunt understood something most people miss. You can't survive winter alone. Not really. You need people, and people need to be taught how to survive together." They reached the cabin. Pruitt looked at it with new appreciation. Marta Vin wasn't crazy. She was the smartest person any of us ever met. "She was alone for 30 years, Ada said quietly. "But she made sure I wouldn't have to be." Pruitt left, and Ada entered her cabin. Her home now, truly. The fire still burned from the wood Hackett had fed it before leaving. The stacks stood solid and protective. The seeds waited in their tin for spring planting. Ada sat by the fire and thought about everything that had changed since that first desperate night. She'd arrived with 93 cents and no hope. She'd been mocked, dismissed, expected to die. Instead, she'd survived. More than survived, she'd thrived. She'd taught a town how to face winter. She'd turned enemies into allies. She'd proven that strength wasn't about hoarding resources, but about sharing knowledge. Spring came eventually, as it always did. The snow melted. Green returned to Wyoming. And Medora, rebuilt and reinforced with Ada's methods, prepared for the next winter with confidence. Ada planted her aunt's seeds, turnips, beans, squash, potatoes, in soil that thawed under generous sun. She taught others how to garden, how to preserve food, how to prepare for winters yet to come. The town prospered, not just survived, but grew. New families arrived, drawn by word of a community that knew how to face hardship together. The boarding house was rebuilt, stronger than before. Mrs. Peterson smiled again, working in the garden Ada helped her plant. And Hackett kept his word. He worked tirelessly to repair, rebuild, assist. Slowly, grudgingly, the town forgave him, because Ada had shown them that forgiveness, like survival, was stronger when shared. Years later, when people told the story of the winter of 1887, they spoke of Ada Vin, the orphan girl who arrived with nothing and saved a town through knowledge, determination, and the understanding that community was stronger than cold. They spoke of her Aunt Marta, whose wisdom had outlived her, passed down through carved messages and careful preparation. They spoke of walls made of wood, of heat held close, of survival earned through innovation rather than force. But most of all, They spoke of a lesson learned in the coldest months anyone could remember, that the only way to survive winter, any winter, whether of snow or circumstance, was together. Ada stood in her doorway one warm June evening, looking out at land that had once seemed like a curse. 12 acres of wind, they'd called it. A joke inheritance for a girl expected to die. But she'd turned those 12 acres into something more valuable than gold. She'd turned them into knowledge, into community, into proof that the least likely person, given the chance to survive, could change everything. The cabin behind her stood solid, its walls of wood a testament to ingenuity born of desperation. The garden before her grew green and promising. And in town, families lived in homes that would never be cold again, because one girl had refused to let winter, or cruelty, or hopelessness be the final word. Ada Vin had inherited 12 acres of wind and a cabin fit for rats. She turned it into a legacy of survival that would outlast them all. Not because she was the strongest, or the richest, or the most prepared, but because she understood what her aunt had tried to teach her from beyond the grave. That true survival is measured not by what you keep for yourself, but by what you give away to ensure everyone lives to see spring.